Well, this is a quotation from a medical journal called The Lancet. Those of you who are in medicine, of course, are familiar with The Lancet, but maybe other people have heard of it. It's a medical journal that comes from the UK. And this is one of the things I'd like to emphasize, is that climate change is likely to become the biggest health problem of this century. And the younger people who are young now, our children and our grandchildren, will suffer a great deal from climate change. This you can go to a website called the Lancet Countdown. It's lancetcountdown.org, and you can see graphically all of the climate data. And some of the slides I'm going to show you came from that website. And it's called Lancet Countdown, and somebody made a joke, and they say, well, it should be Lancet Countdown to Catastrophe. So I try to tell some jokes when I talk, because climate isn't that funny. Okay. Could you go then to the sixth slide, please? I have to skip over. Okay, here. And the second thing I would like to emphasize, and I hope you will learn, is that we don't have to have terrible climate change. We already have the technology to replace fossil fuels with solar and wind and maybe nuclear and maybe tidal energy and geothermal, so that we don't have to have climate change. And that has to be, that's what I ask people to think about, is to work towards having no fossil fuels. And some of the ideas about that, some of the is the group called Citizen Climate Lobby, which is a private group that works to stabilize the climate. They have a plan that's where companies would pay a fee for the carbon that they emitted. And they suggest that the fee would be $100 per ton of carbon. And I'm not an economist, and I don't understand financial things very well, but they say that this idea would allow our country and maybe all the countries of the world to get rid of fossil fuels, to zero out on fossil fuels. And that's what we would really like to do if we could do it. Another plan or another idea is, this may seem totally insane to you, and it seems totally insane to me, that our country and many other countries, for example, India and United Kingdom and Russia, they pay fossil fuel companies to find and drill for oil, and those are called subsidies. So they're giving basically free money to fossil fuel companies in order to find more fossil fuels, in order to kill us. So that's another thing, that a political thing that could be done, is to have no fossil fuel subsidies, to eliminate those from our country's budget and the budget of every other country that has them. Now, another thing that people can do is you can personally reduce your fossil fuels, your use of fossil fuels. And there's an organization called the Nature Conservancy. It's just natureconservancy.org is the website. And you can go there and do a search for carbon footprint. And they have a page where a person can type in the things they do, the things that we do, and you can find out what emits the most carbon dioxide, and then you can maybe use that information to try to modify your lifestyle. Now, on a personal, like, even if, say me, if I reduce all of my carbon emissions that I have a choice over, that's not going to make any difference in the world. About 70% of carbon emissions come from governments and corporations, and only about 30% come from the personal choice of individuals. So even if everybody in the whole world tried hard to reduce their carbon footprint, the most we could do is reduce it by 30%.
If there was a personal choice that an individual could make, where could they make the biggest reduction in their individual carbon footprint?
Well, I'll tell you, it's different for people from different countries because we have different lifestyles. But for the things that you can do, that are part of the American lifestyle, the very worst thing that I know of is a cruise ship. So it would be wonderful to avoid going on cruises. The second worst thing that I know of is flying, and so if you can reduce your flying, that would be very beneficial from a carbon perspective. And the third thing is eating beef. Beef is by a lot the highest food in America that is related to carbon emissions, because lots of fossil fuels are used in the growing of beef. If you're an average American, those are three things you can do. But to be more specific, is if you go to that website, you can find out other things, and of course it depends on your own personal lifestyle. You know, like for some people, their car might be their single biggest carbon emission, and so those things are just like statistical averages. And of course, some people have to fly, and I have to admit, I fly once a year, and because I feel like I have to visit my son. So sometimes, our society is built in such a way that it's hard not to be an emitter of carbon. But anyway, you could look at those things and at least address some of them. And then another thing that you can do, and I bet you everybody here already does this, but another thing you can do is vote. I think it's really, a lot of people say, a lot of the experts who know more than I do, who write the things that I read, say that voting is the single most important thing that you can do to reduce emissions. And this afternoon, I talked to the Fenwick students, some of the Fenwick students, and I said, vote as if your life depends on it, because actually it does, because their lives actually do depend on stopping climate change. If we don't stop climate change, young people like that are going to suffer greatly. The younger you are today, the higher the risk you have of getting sick or dying from climate change. So a baby who's 1 is at the highest risk.
So Bruce, should we wait till the end of your speech?
No, talk anytime you want.
You may never get through your lecture. That's my concern.
I definitely won't get through, because you see I'm a fanatic, and I could talk for 3 hours. I'm not gonna, I promise. I'm not gonna. I have a timer to shut me up. But no, it's better to ask questions now, because if you wait till I'm done, then there won't be any time left. You'll already be asleep.
Okay, well, I don't want to get into controversy, but you got to be pretty cynical about seeing all these people flying to Saudi Arabia or the UAE, which was the biggest oil producer in the world, all the airline miles that went back and forth to get to a climate change.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But those are the people who are supposed to be setting the policy.
You are 100% right about that. The idea of having a high person in an oil company run a climate conference is totally insane. And The Guardian, which is you probably all know, is an English newspaper. They sent 3 English government representatives to that talk, and I forget what ranks they were, but they were high up in the English government. Each one took their own private jet there. Is that insane or what? And you are right. It shows you.
Doing it all over the world too. So you got to be a little cynical about being preached to by people who are not, at least Greta Thunberg, for the one conference she came to, she did take a boat, she did
Yes.
sail across.
Yes.
I was impressed with that.
Yes.
Nobody else did. And she
Yes.
didn't sail back, she flew back. So,
No, I agree with you. The two people that I admire the most who are teaching about climate are Pope Francis and Greta Thunberg. They're genuine, I think. But I totally agree with you that a lot of people are just hypocrites, or they don't get it. And another example of that is there's an organization called Oxfam that their work is to give food to hungry people, but they also do studies in order to try to make their work more effective. And they recently did a study, and they said that if you take the richest 1% of people in the world, those people emit the same amount of greenhouse gases as the poorest 50% of people in the world. And they gave examples of enormous carbon footprints from yachts and private jets and just totally insane stuff. So what you say, Mark, is totally correct, that there's a big problem that people don't understand the urgency. They don't understand how bad climate change is going to be, and that's why I give these talks. And there's other people who are just plain hypocrites. You're totally right about that. But okay, so I wanted to say, does everybody know what the greenhouse gases are on Earth? Okay. Methane, right. Methane is one, absolutely right. Any others? Carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the biggest one. It's about between 80 and 90% of the climate forcing that we cause is carbon dioxide, and about 10% is methane. And a smaller one is nitrous oxide. This comes from synthetic fertilizers. And then another one that we're not worried about is water. Water is water vapor. Water in the atmosphere as a vapor is a greenhouse gas, but this is the only one that we are not increasing. So these three are the ones that we're putting into the atmosphere, and carbon is by far the worst. So this is the one. It's also, of course, good to reduce the others, but this is our main one, and about 90% of this carbon dioxide comes from the burning of fossil fuels. So that's the big one, is we really need to stop fossil fuels and zero it out, because it's late. We can't afford to keep emitting fossil fuels. So we have to try to get to a point where we're not emitting any fossil fuels. Let me just check my notes and see if I forgot to say anything. Okay, no, I think we're good. Okay, then could you go to the next slide? So now I wanted to show you a few slides of climate data. And this comes from a website called Climate Central. Climate Central is a non-government website that was put together by a group of climate scientists and a group of meteorologists. And you can go there. It's just climatecentral.org. And you can look up anything about the climate in the United States. And so here's their slide. This is their slide showing global temperature from 1880 to 2021. And here, this is the change in the temperature. So here's 0. This would be if there was no change. And so you can see that the average temperature of the Earth has increased. The top number is 1.2 degrees centigrade. So we've increased the temperature of the Earth, the average temperature of the Earth, by about 1.2 degrees centigrade. That is about let's see, it's about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And here you can look here. The last 8 years have been the hottest years ever recorded on Earth. And 2023, which is not on this graph yet, but 2023 was the hottest year ever recorded. We're not even at the end of it yet, and it's the hottest year ever recorded. And scientists, real scientists, can go back in time and estimate temperatures using indirect methods. These temperatures are measured. This is just somebody looking at a thermometer and writing it down. We can go back to 1880, but we can go back millions of years using indirect measures of temperature. And this year, 2023, was the hottest year in the last 100,000 as far as scientists can tell. So we're increasing the average temperature of the Earth rapidly. And let's see, right now, that first slide, it said that if we continue doing as we are doing, we'll increase the average temperature of the Earth by 3 degrees centigrade by 2100. That would be about 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're looking at an average temperature increase 5.5 degrees. And there is an agricultural researcher in Iowa who says if we increase the average temperature of the Earth by 3 degrees, you cannot grow corn in Iowa. Okay.
Bruce, question?
Yeah.
Are you able to provide an explanation for that period in purple where the Earth's temperature actually went down rather than up?
No, I don't know if that is a significant difference or if that's just the randomness of the climate.
It's only a maximum of about 0.2 degrees, but I was just curious.
I don't know. I don't know if this is special or not. I think my guess is that's just the randomness of the temperatures, because that would have been before climate change really took hold. Climate change took hold maybe in 1970, maybe. We didn't know it then. We didn't know it in 1970. But okay. Next slide, please. Okay.
This slide also matches probably the population growth of the world.
The temperature slide. It might be similar, yes. Now this is a slide that's really hard to find. This is from a report of deaths in Maricopa County, Arizona. And Maricopa County, Arizona is where Phoenix is. And I think you all know that this past summer in Phoenix that they had extremely high temperatures, and the temperatures were so high, and so many people died from that heat that they haven't yet counted all of them. So this slide does not have data from 2023. It stops at 2022. So this is the number of people who died from heat exposure in Maricopa County. And this is 2012. You can see that about 100 people died in 2012 from heat. And the yellow here is, did you die indoors? And the blue is, did you die outdoors? Okay, so here it was about maybe 60 people died outdoors and maybe 40 people died indoors. So if we jump up here to 2022, well, we had 450 people die, and you can see that the indoor didn't change very much, if at all. Maybe there's no change, but the outdoor increased a whole bunch, and about 400 people died outdoor instead of 60. And that's the effect of heat. That's heat stroke, which can be fatal if not treated. And many of these people who die outdoors are homeless people or poor people who do not have air conditioning in their houses. Also, elderly people and babies are more sensitive to extreme heat. But anyway, so there's a saying, and I use this to help people to remember the graph. The saying is, it'll be hot in Phoenix, but a lot hotter if you're poor. And that's another aspect of climate change, is that the poor are the ones who take the hit. So young people and poor people are the ones who are going to take this big climate hit that we have coming. Okay, does anybody have any questions about the heat deaths in Maricopa County? Okay. Now, I'm going to just tell you briefly about this report that came from the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army has what they call a war college, and it's kind of like the Dominican College for the U.S. Army. And what they do is they study problems that the Army will have in the future. And in 2019, they released this report, and if you want, you can go online and read it. And you just go online and say implications of climate change for the U.S. Army. Just type that in, and you'll get the entire document. You can download it if you want. And it's a long document, but you don't have to read the whole thing. The first 4 pages are a summary. So if you just read the first 4 pages, you'll have the Army's idea of climate change. Now, the U.S. Army calls climate change a threat multiplier. And what that means is that it makes other types of problems worse, problems that already exist, but it makes them worse, and it makes war more likely by making those problems worse. So before climate change, we always had forest fires and heat waves and hurricanes. It's just that with climate change, those problems are going to be worse, okay? Go ahead. Thank you. Now, this is a summary of the report, and I only put in the things that are medical. So all the military things I left out. These are just the medical things. And the first thing I want to mention is forced migration. And that means that people will have to move away from their traditional homes because in some areas they'll become too hot to live there, and in other areas the sea level rise will force people to move, okay? So the Army is worried about that because it creates instability and it creates mass migrations. And so that's probably the Army's biggest medical worry. And just as an example, just in the United States, probably New Orleans and Miami and Savannah and Charleston will not be habitable in the future. By 2100, those cities will either be abandoned or will have to build a seawall around them. And many other cities. Maybe you know this already, but it used to be that Jakarta, Indonesia, was the capital city of Indonesia. And it's not the capital anymore. The government abandoned it because it's sinking. It has about half the days of the year there's flooding in Jakarta, Indonesia. So the government didn't do anything about climate change, and they didn't do anything to help the people of Jakarta. They just said, we're going to get the hell out of here. And so they left, and now they're building a new capital city on higher ground. So Jakarta, Indonesia is the first city that succumbs to climate change, it looks like. The second thing I want to mention is that food is going to be harder to come by. The Army predicts that agricultural harvests will fail more often due to heat and due to extreme weather events like floods and droughts. So worldwide, food will become more difficult for everybody to obtain. And even those of us who are privileged will have to pay much higher prices than we're used to for food. You might know, in 2015, the UN had a plan, and it was a plan to provide food to everybody so that hunger would cease in the world. And this plan has failed because, at least in part, because of climate change. In 2020, there were fewer people hungry in the world than in 2021. And in 2021, in 2021, there were more people hungry than in 2020. And in 2022, there are more people hungry than in 2021. So in terms of hunger, we're going in the wrong direction. It's not all due to climate change, it's also due to population increase, and it's due to instability like the Ukraine war. So it's not all due to climate change, but part of it is climate change. The third thing I wanted to mention from the U.S. Army is tropical infectious diseases are moving towards the poles. So in the United States, we have more Lyme disease than we used to have. There's been studies from Pennsylvania and studies from Maryland and Maine showing increases in the incidence of Lyme disease. Lyme disease, maybe you know this, but I'll just tell you, it's a disease caused by a bacteria, and the bacteria is transmitted by the bite of a tick. And so when people get a tick bite, they may, not always, but they may get the bacteria and then develop Lyme disease. And Lyme disease is increasing because the summer is longer and the opportunity for a person to be bitten by a tick is greater. It used to be that Canada was too cold for Lyme disease because the ticks couldn't live there, and now Canada has Lyme disease. They have about 10 times more cases than they used to have, say, in the year 2000, because ticks have migrated to Canada and can live there now because it's not as cold. Tropical mosquitoes are moving higher up mountains and moving to the north. Maybe you heard that in the state of Florida this past summer, there were 5 cases of malaria in people who did not leave Florida, in people who were residents of Florida all the time, and they were then bitten by mosquitoes and given malaria in Florida. Now, in the mosquito that carries malaria is called Anopheles. That's the genus name, and it's moving north as it gets warmer. There's another disease, dengue fever, that's carried by the Aedes mosquito. It also carries yellow fever and Zika virus. And this past summer, Aedes mosquitoes were found in Vermont, where they had never been observed before. Now, nobody in Vermont got sick, but Aedes mosquitoes were found there by the Department of Public Health.
All right, so in order for a disease like that to occur in Florida, you have to have the vector.
Right, you have to have mosquitoes.
You have to have the organism that causes the disease,
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
So how does the malaria organism, it's a parasite, right? Or is it a virus?
No, it's called a plasmodium. It's an organism that's like an amoeba.
Right.
It's a eukaryotic organism that's similar to an amoeba.
Okay.
It's carried in the mosquito salivary gland.
All right, but would it be correct to assume that a mosquito somehow got up to Florida with that organism, or that the organism got to Florida, let's say through immigration, and the mosquito somehow bites an infected person,
Well,
and now you're off to the races?
you have to have the mosquito there. But if you said, I hypothesize that a person came to Florida with malaria, and then they were bitten by an Anopheles mosquito who bit another person, that could be. That is absolutely right. So it could be that a human carried malaria to Florida and then was bitten by the correct mosquito. It has to be the correct one because the organism lives in the salivary gland of the mosquito, and most mosquitoes don't support the organism. So like an Aedes mosquito can't give you malaria even if it wants to.
Right, it gives you yellow fever.
Right, it gives you yellow fever or Zika or dengue. And so these are diseases that we might see in this country in the future as it becomes warmer. And other examples are West Nile. West Nile has been increasing in the United States, and that's carried by a different mosquito that's called Culex. The Culex mosquito is a temperate mosquito that's been moving northward in the United States and also into Canada. And West Nile is another disease that recently has moved to Canada. So Canada can thank us for Lyme disease and West Nile virus. Another thing is, in the news, maybe you have seen articles where they talk about flesh-eating bacteria. Has anybody seen articles like that? Well, that refers to a bacteria called Vibrio. And Vibrio Vibrio is famous because it causes an infectious disease in Asia, cholera, and I'm sure you've all heard of cholera. But Vibrio, some Vibrio do not cause cholera, but instead they cause a disease called necrotizing fasciitis. And necrotizing fasciitis causes the death of muscle tissue and skin and connective tissues from a rapidly spreading bacteria. It's kind of like Clostridium. You probably have heard of Clostridium causing the death of tissues. And this is similar. And what's happened is, this is a bacteria that lives in salt water. So as the ocean gets warmer, say around Florida and along the East Coast, then the concentration of these bacteria increases. And then, say if you're out on a boat or swimming and you get a cut or scrape yourself, it can get infected by this organism, and then you can get necrotizing fasciitis. And about 1/3 of people who get it die from it. But in the news, they've gotten this name of flesh-eating bacteria. They don't use vibriosis. I don't know why, but they're not being official. Okay, another one. I'll just mention one more, and that's Naegleria. And again, in the news, maybe you've heard about the amoeba that eats brains, brain-eating amoeba, and that's Naegleria. And this is an amoeba that only can live in warm water. The water has to be pretty close to 90 degrees for Naegleria to live in it. And what's happening in some of the southern states is lakes are getting warm enough that they're getting to have Naegleria. And the way a person gets that disease is through your nose. At the top of your nose is a connection between the brain and the nose. It's called the cribriform plate. And that's where the neurons are located that are responsible for our sense of smell. And if you go swimming in a warm lake, say in Texas or Florida, that has these amoebas, then they can ascend to your nose and enter the brain through your nose and give you what is a fatal disease. I'm not sure if anyone's been cured of it, but so Naegleria, okay. These are all genus names that I'm giving you.
Bruce, just to go back to what you were talking about, did you say Jakarta has been abandoned now?
No, not the city. The government abandoned it. It was the capital,
Right.
and the government abandoned it, but they left the citizens there. The citizens are still there. They're just walking in knee-deep water half the year. The government wasn't that worried about the citizens. They just were worried about their own buildings and records and
Right,
stuff.
So, like Bangladesh, I've heard Bangladesh got some real issues, and then
Yes.
salt water coming in, it's affecting rice and other things. But right now, you're saying the worst case is Jakarta.
As a city,
Right.
Jakarta is the first city that I know of to be abandoned because of climate change. It only was abandoned by its government. The poor people, they're stuck with it.
Right.
But you're right about Bangladesh. In fact, in this report, this Army report, the Army predicts that Bangladesh will be the first state that will fail because of climate change and because of terrible flooding. Bangladesh, almost all of Bangladesh is at very low sea level, and they're going to be awash in water in the not very far distant future. And it's very pathetic. What the government of Bangladesh is doing, you can imagine they have no money, of course, and they have no big ability to build infrastructure. They're a really poor country. So what they're doing is they're urging their citizens to plant trees and bushes that are resistant, that can live in water. So I saw a movie, and I'm sorry I forget the name of it, but it's a really sad movie. It shows a bunch of school children going out part of the day and planting trees and bushes to stave off climate change. And it's like totally pathetic and sad, I guess like all of climate change is. Okay, next slide, please. These are 2 quotes from this Army report. I'll just let you read them. The way I read them, in between the lines, is that millions of people are going to die from climate change. It doesn't say that, but that's my own personal reading. Okay, I think we could go on. Now, this is an example. This comes from Lancet Countdown that you could look up if you want. This comes from Lancet Countdown, and this is a complicated graph, and I'll try to explain it. This is the number of days that you can grow a crop in the United States. And they have 6 different crops. Like, say, this blue, say, for example, is maize, okay? So what's happening, this is in 1980, it starts in 1980, and this is the percent change in the number of growing days. And I don't think you can see this, but this is 0. So if we had a line straight across like this, and see this green one is like that, the green one is winter wheat. It's pretty straight. So the number of days that you could grow winter wheat in the United States has not changed from 1980 to 2020. But if you look at this blue one, maize, and if you look at this blue-green one, soybeans, there's been a 10% decline in the number of days that you can grow those crops. And that's because it's too hot or too dry, and sometimes it's because of a flood. So this is anticipating the agricultural problems that will occur in the future from climate change, or that might occur in the future from climate change. And so you can see now that there's been a 10% decline for these 2 crops. It's harder for farmers to grow those crops because of the changes in weather. Is that graph clear to everybody? Does it make sense? Okay, so there's 6 crops. Some have changed and some have not. But most of them, I think 4 of the 6, you can see there's been declines in the number of days. Okay, go ahead to the next one. Now this also comes from Lancet Countdown, and this is how much of the world is subject to droughts. And it starts in 1950, and it goes to 2020. And they're talking about 3 different lengths of droughts. This brown is 3 months, this red-brown, and this brown is 2 months, and the blue is 1 month. So you can see here that about 20% of the world, this is the whole world, had a drought that was at least a month long in 1950. But if we go to 2020, that has gone all the way up to 47%. So almost half the world was in a state of drought in 2020. And that's part of the reason why we have so many wildfires. And it's also, in time, this will become part of the problem that we have with agricultural crops. Does this graph make sense to everybody? Okay, go ahead then. All right, now, you know what? I have to stop. My time is up. I talked too much already. Why don't we, let's go to the last slide, please. The one before last. That one. Now, this is an odd thing, but Moby Dick, a story that you're all familiar with, it's like a great climate change book. Now, how could Melville have been writing about climate change in 1850? Well, I don't know the answer. But this is our children up there and our grandchildren, and this is climate change. And this is a quote from Pope Francis, and I think he's really right about this. I think he totally understands climate change. And then go to the last one, please, and then I'll quit. These are just some references for you. Climate Central, I told you about. Never Let Me Go is a novel I think it's a novel about children learning about climate change. That's only my opinion, okay? And I'm not an expert on literature. I'm not qualified to talk about literature interpretation, okay? So if you read the book and you think I'm wrong, that's fine. But anyway, I think it's a book about children learning about climate change. It includes also children learning about sex. So I'm not sure that it's the right book for Fenwick students to read. It might be that you'd have a parent revolt if you had Fenwick students read this book. I'm not sure about that. I don't know. But this is a wonderful book. This book will give you a better feeling of what climate change is like than any scientific thing that anybody can tell you. This is a wonderful, wonderful newsletter for young people. You can go online to Under Gigaton and sign up for it. It's free. It comes from the business department of Stanford University and the economics department of University of California, Berkeley. And what it is it tells young people what companies are doing to fight climate change. And so it tells people what would be a good company to work for. And so this would be like the perfect thing for Fenwick students. In fact, if I was in charge of the school, I would automatically sign every student up for it. And so if you know some young people, pass this on to them. Gigaton newsletter, it's free, and it's very good. And then this is the most recent letter about climate change by Pope Francis, Laudate Deum. And I know every one of you from Fenwick can translate it. It's, as you say, it's praise God. It's the imperative. And of course at Fenwick, when we were there were a lot of imperatives. This is only 8 pages long, and it gives you a great summary of the science of climate change, and it also talks about the social justice aspects of climate change. Now, I realize most people say, you want me to read an encyclical by the Pope? Give me a break, you know? But actually, that's not true in this case. I guarantee if you read the first page, you'll read all of it. So give it a try. You can go online and search under Laudate Deum and then choose an English translation, unless you remember more Latin than I do. Okay, now I really have to stop talking, and I'd be happy to try to answer questions.
What would you say is the percentage is due to U.S. versus, let's say, China or India? How much are we responsible for
Well,
versus China and India?
there are five big polluters in the world, and if only those 5 would take action, our problems would be much better. And those are China, the worst right now, the United States second, the European Union, including England, third, Russia, and India. Those are the big polluters, and those are the countries that need the most to take action. Other countries, many other countries have negligible, like if you take Bangladesh, they don't have hardly any carbon emissions. So those are the big 5. Now, if you look historically, in the 20th century, United States is the worst. And 19th century, England is the worst. But 21st century, China is the worst. Now, our government, well, some members of our government, like President Biden, say we can be down to 0 emissions by 2050. The leader of China says we can't do that, but we can be down to 0 by 2060. So the US and China have plans. We, of course, just having a plan doesn't mean we'll carry it out, but they have plans. The European Union is the best. They say 2040, they're going to be at 0 emissions. And so far as I know, India and Russia do not have any kind of a plan. So that's the situation now. But we can't blame China too much, because in the 20th century we were the worst. Another way to look at it, and this is the way the Chinese look at it, they look at not total emissions, but emissions per person. Uh-oh, we're worse than China on emissions per person. So don't be too proud.
The science on this is all crystal clear, and yet there are still many people, and some of my family members included, who deny that this exists. Have you had any strategies of how to talk to people about this? Because presenting facts doesn't seem to...
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. I don't have any magic answers, okay? The reason that I use the Army report is I give a lot of talks in Wisconsin. And in Wisconsin, in the rural areas, is pretty red. And when I use the Army report, nobody argues with me. You know, nobody's going to get up and say the U.S. Army is lying. Not where I live, you know. But if I used like another report, like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change or Global Exchange from the U.S. government, people would say, oh, I don't believe it. It's all this and that. But that's why I use the Army report, is because to this day, no one has ever gotten up and claimed that the Army was lying to them. But it is a problem. There's a website called Yale Climate Communications, and they talk about how you can communicate with people about climate. And I've read it, and I don't know. I don't know if I can do it. What they say is you have to have your values be in sync with the values of the people you're trying to persuade. You know that, like, for example, you say, well, I'm for honesty. You know, I want to be honest about climate change. And then maybe another person who is a skeptic would say, well, this guy's trying to be honest. You know, and maybe that helps. I don't know, you know. But that's a source. You could look at it at Yale Climate Communications, and they have suggestions for how to talk to climate deniers. But I use the U.S. Army thing so that I don't have to talk to climate deniers. And I haven't ever used this, but there's a joke. It says, denial is a river in Egypt. You know, I don't know if that's any good. And actually, I should tell you some more jokes. I have some more climate jokes. So here's a riddle, okay? What do the Israelis and the Palestinians have in common? And here's the climate answer. Both will be climate refugees. Well, is that funny? I'm not sure. And here's another one. This is a joke now. It's not a true story. But in the joke, a person asks the head of an oil company if they're addressing climate change. And he says, we don't have to worry at all about climate change because the rising seas will put out the wildfires. And then I have one more joke, and this is that a lot of people are worried about that animals are going to become extinct because of climate change, and lots of people are going to die. But what they forget to mention is that bacteria and fungi will not be hurt by climate change. They can evolve so fast that no matter how fast we heat up the Earth, they're going to be ahead of us. So bacteria and fungi are going to be fine.
And so will rats and roaches too.
Well, maybe so. Yep. Okay.
And Chris, does Bruce have to leave at 8 o'clock? Is it because you missed? I mean, you have to lecture.
Well,
I'd love to sit through and listen to the whole thing. I have never heard about the bacteria being. I mean, I'm understanding now there is a correlation between the climate change and this stuff as the oceans form.
yes.
But I mean, you have half your lecture we didn't see, so I'm more than willing to sit here if you are, if other people are.
Well, I could keep going but if maybe people should feel free to leave if they would like to leave, or Chris, I don't know what it.
You're welcome.
No, I'd rather
Okay.
push through. You only got 2. I got 3.
Okay, well, let's go back to the first slide, or the second slide then, please. Here's something that I think might be good for climate deniers, but this is obviously a picture of the solar system. And everybody knows that Mercury is the closest planet to the sun, and that the next planet is Venus, and the next planet is Earth. Everybody knows that, okay? Now, Venus is about twice as far from the sun as Mercury, but Venus is the hottest planet in the solar system. Why is that? It's because its atmosphere contains very high concentrations of carbon dioxide. It's the greenhouse effect magnified very greatly. Mercury has little atmosphere, and it doesn't have greenhouse gases in its atmosphere, whereas Venus has tons of carbon dioxide in its atmosphere. I mean, megatons. So Venus is hotter than Mercury, even though it's twice as far from the sun, because of greenhouse gases. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead with the next slide, please. No, if you're falling asleep, it's okay, I know. Okay, here's a picture I took from the internet. And this was from the student climate strike. This was organized by Greta Thunberg. You might remember in 2018, there were student strikes all over the world. And I loved this young woman's picture. She says she's studying for a future that's currently being destroyed. And this is what I want us older people, those of us who are older, to remember, that our children and grandchildren are going to suffer if we don't do something, or we should at least try to do something. Let's see. Now, Greta Thunberg said, this is a quote, "For children and young people, climate change is the single greatest threat to our futures." So I think that's true. I think she's 100% right about that. Okay, go ahead. This is to show you that fossil fuels cause most of the air pollution that we have. I didn't talk about air pollution, and I'll talk a little bit about it now. So fossil fuels cause about 90% of the air pollution, and they cause about 90% of the climate force that is changing the temperature of the planet. Okay, go ahead. Now, the World Health Organization says that about 4.2 million people in the world die from outdoor air pollution each year. Most of those people die in Asia, where the air pollution is a lot worse than it is in the United States. But in the U.S., it's estimated that between 100,000 and 300,000 people die as a result of air pollution. And what does air pollution do? It makes heart attacks more likely, it makes strokes more likely, it makes premature birth more likely. It causes asthma, and it also causes attacks in people who already have asthma. So if you're a person who already has heart disease, then air pollution might be enough to push you into a myocardial infarction, into a heart attack. Or if you're a person who's high risk for a stroke, bad air pollution might be enough to push you into that stroke. So air pollution increases the risk of certain catastrophic health events. Okay, and then it hasn't happened yet, but it seems likely to me that unless things change a lot, that millions of people who are children today will die younger deaths from climate change. Okay, go ahead. Now, then if you skip down, I think it's, keep going, a red slide, an orange one. There, this one. We had lots of terrible air pollution in the Midwest this summer from wildfires in Canada. And climate change increases the risks of those wildfires. Climate change makes the forest drier, and it makes the summer season longer. So if a fire starts, climate change makes that fire worse. And then we get that smoke from Canada. And during this summer in Wisconsin and in Illinois, we all had many, maybe a dozen or 20 days where the air pollution was very high, and we were warned to stay inside and not exercise and stuff like that. Well, it wasn't that last summer was unlucky. That's it. That's our future, is smoke. Smoke is our future. Okay, go ahead. So here is just a summary, a quick summary that it's easy to understand that greenhouse gases are the cause of climate change. And there they are, CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. And global heating is going to become the most serious public health problem. Probably by 2040, it'll be the most serious public health problem. More people will die from climate change than now die from heart attacks and strokes and cancer and the other common causes of disease. And it is solvable by stopping the emission of greenhouse gases. Right now, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is about 420 parts per million. That's too high. We have to get it down to about 350. So we have to stop emitting, and then we have to even try to reduce to 350. 350 gives us back. We don't have it now, but it'll give us back a stable climate. That's, at least scientists think so, people who know a lot more than I do. Now, how do we go from 420 to 350? The best way that we have to take carbon out of the atmosphere is a tree right now. Maybe we will develop technology that can do it, but trees right now take carbon out of the atmosphere better than anything. There's also a practice called regenerative farming, where farmers can grow crops that they can grow crops during poor growing times, like say in the winter, and then they can plow those crops into the ground and they can add carbon to their soil. They can increase the carbon in the soil, and that converts their soil into being better for growing. It's called regenerative farming. And that's another way that we can take carbon out of the atmosphere. That's a new way that people are working on. Okay, go ahead. Now, these are just ways, just a list of things that can be done to reduce the effect of climate change, to reduce CO2 emissions. We can have lower emission transportation, like a train. If you fly from Chicago to Boston, one guy flies and the other guy takes a train, or the other person. A woman could do it too, of course. I'm sorry. But so a person goes from Chicago to Boston. If you go by plane and you go by train, if they compare their carbon emissions, the person who took the train has 83% fewer emissions than the person who flew. So low emission transportation. There's a short saying that I used to remember. It's called travel thoughtfully. So travel thoughtfully. You can buy a car that has low emissions, a car that's fuel efficient, or maybe that's a hybrid, or maybe that's electric, rather than a giant gas guzzler. You can make your home more energy efficient. And younger people, and this is something I think is very important for our Fenwick students, is to choose businesses and careers that benefit the planet, and to be aware of climate. If we teach our young people this information, then they can maybe use it to make the world better than it is. The world we live in is really not what we wanted. So careers that are good for the planet, I think, are very important, and that's why that Gigaton newsletter is good. And then the other thing is we'd like to conserve ecosystems. The two big ones we'd like to conserve, if we could, would be the Amazon rainforest and the boreal forest in Canada and Alaska. Those are the two biggest carbon-sucking things in the world. So we would like to preserve those if we could. And we would like to have zero human population growth. We'd like to stabilize the human climate, if we could. Okay, go ahead, please. So here are things a person can consider doing. You can try to reduce your personal carbon footprint using that Nature Conservancy carbon calculator. You can learn about climate change. you can search in your community for organizations that work to reduce climate change. There's a lot of organizations like Sierra Club and Citizen Climate Lobby, Environmental Defense Fund, Natural Resources Defense Council. And I told the students this afternoon, Extinction Rebellion, that's a climate group that especially for children. They wouldn't even let me join if I asked them. But it's for younger people, Extinction Rebellion. Okay, go ahead, please. Okay, and that's the end of my talk.
Any questions or further questions? How optimistic or pessimistic are you?
Well, it varies in the day. Sometimes a lot of times I wake up at like 2 o'clock in the morning and I feel like really terrible and really discouraged and depressed. But then later, if I have a cup of coffee, I don't feel so bad. And so it depends a lot, you know. I'm not sure that we can that I would want to make a prediction. There's positive things happening and there's negative things happening. And who's going to win out? It's hard to say.
What's your take on the needed infrastructure to distributing green energy?
Oh, I think we should do whatever we can, yes, definitely. I'd be in favor of any kind of green energy plan or that there is, you know, that might be able to be, that's feasible.
I've heard that's a huge impediment to making any of this happen.
Yes. What we need is like. Let me give you an example that the Stanford University Department of Engineering did a study, and they said if we made a solar farm that was 100 miles long and 100 miles wide, and we put it in New Mexico, Arizona desert, then we would have enough energy for the entire country. We wouldn't need anything else. But you have to get that energy to New York City and to Chicago. And the way you do it is high voltage power lines. So that's part of the infrastructure. There's no sense in having a solar farm unless you can connect it to a high voltage power line that will carry your electricity where it's needed. Because the best places to have a solar farm are in the Southwest desert. And the best places to have a wind farm are in windy areas in Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, going down Oklahoma, Texas. So that central part of the country is the windiest. But those things only will work if you have high voltage power lines to carry the power to New York City and Boston and Chicago. So high voltage power lines are a critical part. It can't work without that. That is correct.
Well, Bruce, NPR yesterday, I was listening. They were talking about climate change and things, and they had experts on. And they asked the same question. They said, what's the odds that by 2030 the U.S. is going to get to its 50% reduction in emissions from 2007? And the answer there was, it's very probable because we're already halfway there. Believe it or not, from what they said, we've already reduced from 2007 to get to a 50% reduction from that. We're halfway there already. And then they went through the incremental things that are in place to get there. So they said the 50% reduction for the U.S. seems likely, but the 100% reduction by 2050 is a crapshoot.
Yes, there's an organization of engineers. It's called the International Energy Association. They're in the European Union, and they say that the European Union also is on track. They say that the European Union is on track to be zero at 2040, and so maybe it can be done, and maybe, you know, this is a hopeful statement, but if Europe can do it and if the U.S. can do it, then maybe China will say, well, could we borrow some of your technology, and then maybe they could do better, and then maybe India will also come up with a plan. I don't know about Russia. It seems almost hopeless unless there was a change in government there. But you know, I wouldn't say it can't be done. I think that would be a mistake. I think for the sake of the younger people in the world, we have to try. Even if you feel that we're doomed, well, at least you might as well try. I think it was the lawyer Clarence Darrow. He said the only causes worth fighting for are those that are doomed. Well, okay. I mean, I think it's worth it. It's worth a try.
And fail is better not to try at all.
That's what I think. Yes, that's what I think.
Same.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Bruce, when we sort of marketed it this evening, and I asked you what was sort of the theme, or is there sort of a marketing thing? You said nature bats last.
Yeah.
Right? So I took that to mean something, but what does that mean to you?
Well, that means that, see, we have this idea in part of our society that we control nature and that nature serves us. And actually, I think it's a little bit similar to the Captain Ahab in Moby Dick. He thought that nature was to do with whatever he wanted. And this is a mistake, because nature is going to last. You know, you can put a harpoon in the Moby Dick, but maybe he's going to sink your ship. And we can say we're going to drill for oil, and we're going to use coal and whatever, and we're going to be masters of nature, but then we're going to get hit back. We're going to have droughts and crop failures and heat waves. So that's what I mean by it, that we can do stuff to nature, but nature's going to hit back. It's going to have that ninth inning, that bottom of the ninth.
Anybody else? Bruce, thank you very much for being here this evening. We really appreciate it.